Sometimes people that we think of as bad people, and maybe they really are bad people, and people that we really want to dislike, are people who have sort of gotten caught up in circumstances more or less against their will. And in the midst of all of their evil doing, they sometimes have regret. And you get the idea that occasionally you'll see some regret that maybe they don't really want to be the way they are. Maybe they don't want to do the things that they're doing. And such is the case with Draco Malfoy, the ubiquitous bully who was portrayed so brilliantly by Tom Felton in the Harry Potter series. I actually, a while back, had a chance to see a program called Tom Felton Meets the Superfans, and in this TV show, Tom Felton was investigating the phenomenon of super fandom, and he wanted to know what motivates super fans. And I got to say, Tom Felton appeared to be a very nice guy in this super fan show. But Draco Malfoy was the quintessential bully. He appears thoroughly bad right from the start. You got to understand, though, that his parents were bad. The family situation that Draco grew up in was very, very bad. His parents were Lucius and Narcissa Malfoy, and they were Death Eaters. Apparently, they were some of Voldemort's earliest supporters. Narcissa Malfoy's sister was the evil Bellatrix Lestrange, who was, of course, Voldemort's consort. Thoroughly evil woman, wanted to kill Harry Potter herself. Lucius appears to have been a very well-off employee of the Ministry of Magic, and somehow he managed to conceal that he had been a supporter of Voldemort. A lot of people, it was claimed that they did things under the Imperious Curse, and Lucius may have done that and essentially gotten away with it. So he worked at the Ministry of Magic, and although he was very well off, the Weasley family, Arthur Weasley and his family, weren't particularly well off. Of course, one of the reasons was that the Weasleys had an awful lot of kids. They had Bill and Charlie and Percy, who for a long time was a bad guy, and then they had Ron and Bill and Fred, or George and Fred rather, and Ginny. So that was a big family, and Lucius Malfoy looked down on them. Lucius was a pure-blood wizard, and he was one of the purebloods who joined in with Voldemort, and one of the things that they wanted to do was essentially rid the wizarding world of mudbloods, and they didn't like half-bloods either, in spite of the fact that Voldemort himself was a half-blood. So Lucius was a pureblood, and he was evil and contemptuous of people who were not from pureblood wizarding families. We meet Draco, of course, in the Sorcerer's Stone, and Draco tells Harry that he doesn't want to go getting involved with the wrong sort. And in saying that, he's being extremely contemptuous of Ronald Weasley, who was quickly becoming Harry's best friend. And Harry says he is quite capable of discerning the wrong sort for himself. Malfoy has two dumbbell lackeys known as Crabbe and Goyle, and they were both from Death Eater families as well, it turns out. We don't really learn that until Goblet of Fire, but then we discover that Goyle and Crabbe are Death Eaters. So they were two really dumbbells. And in the Sorcerer's Stone, one of the first misdeeds that we see Draco doing is he's harassing Neville out on the Quidditch patch, and Neville gets hurt, and Madame Hooch has to carry Neville to the hospital, and at that point Harry's up on a broom chasing a snitch, and McGonagall catches him, and he ends up on the Quidditch team as a result. Draco obviously is jealous, and he ends up on the Slytherin Quidditch team as the Seeker. So they become nemesis to each other, not just in real life, but on the Quidditch teams as well. In the Chamber of Secrets, Harry suspects that Malfoy is the Slytherin heir. So he and Ron and Hermione cook up this scheme to determine if it's Draco who has opened the Chamber of Secrets. Crabbe and Goyle are just idiots, and they are also gluttons, and they eat everything in sight. And Hermione comes up with this plan to slip a sleeping potion in sort of these muffin cakes or whatever it was. I don't remember exactly what it was. And these two confections or whatever they are just kind of floating in the ether. And Crabbe and Goyle come along and they grab these muffin cakes and they start to eat them and their eyes roll back and they just pass out on the floor. And then Ron and Harry are able to hide them in a closet and get some of their hairs to use in the Polyjuice potion, and they're going to transform themselves into Crabbe and Goyle to try to learn the truth. And Hermione's going to transform into somebody as well, but her transformation doesn't go nearly as well, and she turns into like this cat-like creature and spends her entire transport time hiding in the bathroom. But Harry and Ron do go meet up with Malfoy and for a time confuse Malfoy that they are Crabbe and Goyle. And at one point it's very interesting that Malfoy, believing that Harry was one of his lackeys, I can't remember whether it's Crabbe or Goyle, I always get the two mixed up, is wearing glasses, and Draco says, "Why are you wearing glasses?" He says, "Reading." And Draco says, "I didn't know you could read." So that's just an example of how dumb Crabbe and Malfoy were. And the Prisoner of Azkaban, Draco is responsible for the execution of Buckbeak the Hippogriff. He also has an extremely negative attitude toward Hagrid, calling him a stupid oaf or something similar to that. And after Harry successfully meets Buckbeak and then is able to take the ride up over the Black Lake and over the castle and back, Malfoy decides he wants to prove that Buckbeak isn't such a dangerous creature also. So he walks up to Buckbeak and places his hand on Buckbeak, and Buckbeak, of course, slashes him in the arm. And Malfoy, as he's being carried off into the hospital, says, "My father will hear about this." And that's one of the lines that you constantly hear from Draco. "My father will hear about this," because Lucius is a big deal in the Ministry of Magic and on the Board of Governors. So Draco is responsible ultimately for the execution of Buckbeak the Hippogriff, and Buckbeak is of course rescued when Harry and Hermione go and use a time turner to go back and fix all the events, because Sirius Black was about to be not executed, he was about to receive the Dementor's kiss, which sucks a person's soul out of their body and then they're destroyed basically for the rest of their life. But it was Draco who was responsible for the killing of Buckbeak, when actually he was the one who was out of line. I should mention also that in the Chamber of Secrets, when all the students were being petrified, Lucius and the other governors had Hagrid sent to, Cornelius Fudge was actually the one who did that, but Lucius was very much involved in it. They had Hagrid sent to Azkaban because they suspected him of opening the Chamber of Secrets. And also the Board of Governors suspended Dumbledore as headmaster. Of course, after Ginny Weasley was kidnapped and dragged into the Chamber of Secrets, the governors reinstated Dumbledore and he was back. In the Goblet of Fire, Malfoy is seen harassing Harry. He was saying that his father and he have a disagreement about whether Harry will last 5 or 10 minutes in facing the dragons, and they're about to get into hellacious argument apparently. And then Barty Crouch Jr., who is actually masquerading as Mad-Eye Moody, comes along and turns Malfoy into a ferret, and everybody's so amused by this because he is not well liked by many people. Malfoy is just a bully all the way around. In the Order of Phoenix, the bad side really has a field day. You have this rising tide of evil, and Harry and his friends form Dumbledore's army, and Dolores Umbridge arrives as the High Inquisitor, and she's immediately taking over everything there, and for a time actually replaces Dumbledore as she becomes head mistress for a while, though she was never able to get into Dumbledore's office because only the true headmaster can get into there, and so she had to use a separate office. But Malfoy became one of her enforcers, and he was a prefect, and he was also on some sort of enforcement squad, and they were causing Harry all kinds of issues as he was working out a way to go rescue Sirius Black, which ultimately didn't happen because Sirius Black died. But Malfoy was in the middle of all kinds of evil when Dolores Umbridge was temporarily headmistress at Hogwarts. In the Half-Blood Prince, Malfoy is assigned by Voldemort to kill Dumbledore. And he attempts to do this several times and is not successful. Ultimately, he is in the final scene where Dumbledore is killed, and he's about to do it, but he can't quite do it, and Severus Snape ends up killing Dumbledore. Of course, eventually we learn in the Deathly Hallows that Severus Snape was actually a double agent. That he was really on the good side, and he was masquerading on the bad side, and he was in fact risking his life to protect Harry and the other students at Hogwarts. So Severus Snape, despite his very extremely good portrayal of being on the evil side, he actually was on the good side, and he was a hero. And the full measure of that doesn't become obvious until you get to the staged play, The Cursed Child, but we're going to get to there pretty soon. So Malfoy made several attempts, but ultimately he isn't the one who kills Dumbledore. In the Deathly Hallows, Harry and Hermione and Ron are on the run for a long time. After the events of the Half-Blood Prince, they had to leave Hogwarts to go on the mission to find the Horcruxes, and with some difficulty they do get that started, but in the process of, while they're on the run, they are actually caught by some people called Snatchers and taken to Malfoy Manor. But something happens to Harry's face out in the woods. I can't remember. I recently saw Deathly Hallows again, and I can't remember whether it's a curse that Hermione used to change appearance or whether it was some accidental infection that he caught out in the woods, but his face didn't look quite normal. And so as they took Hermione to Malfoy Manor, and Ron and Harry were taken prisoner as well, Draco Malfoy refuses to identify Harry to his parents. He knows that it's Harry. He knows that Harry's right there in the house, but he refuses to identify him. He won't come out and say that it's Harry. And so, at least to begin with, they don't know that it's Harry Potter right there. They do find out after Dobby the House Elf comes and rescues them. By the time Dobby gets there, they know it's Harry, but to begin with, Draco refuses to identify Harry. And another interesting thing that happened in the Half-Blood Prince, there was one scene where Draco was actually crying in the restroom. Now, Harry didn't use the best timing in that incident, because he actually approached Draco and cursed him with a curse that produced large cuts on his body, and he was bleeding pretty badly, and Severus Snape had to come along and fix it. But for some reason, Draco was in the bathroom crying, as if he didn't want to be doing what he was doing, as if he didn't really want to be on this evil side. And of course, ultimately, he didn't kill Dumbledore, but then he refuses to identify Harry when Harry is basically a prisoner along with Hermione and Ron and Luna Lovegood and Griphook and Ollivander. They're all being held at Malfoy Manor, and Draco refuses to positively identify Harry at first. And by this time, if they hadn't been wondering before, the audience is surely wondering what's going on with Draco, because he seems to be reluctant to be doing some of the things that he's doing. And then finally, in the original canon, the original movies and the original book, we come to the Battle of Hogwarts, and we know that what ultimately happened there was that Harry was attacked with the killing curse, but he didn't really die. And he had a talk with Dumbledore. They were somewhere in the beyond, and Harry makes the decision to come back. And before that he reveals that he's alive, Voldemort approaches the crowd and says, "Now you must all put your faith in me." And Draco at first doesn't want to join in with the Death Eaters. You get the idea that even though it looks like the battle is lost, he really wants to stay with the Hogwarts crowd. But unfortunately, in the original canon and the original movies, we don't get to see Draco make the full journey to good guy. That doesn't happen until the stage play, The Cursed Child. In that situation, Scorpius Malfoy and Albus Severus Potter, that's Harry's son and Draco's son, become best friends, and they cook up a scheme to go back and change history so that Cedric Diggory doesn't have to die. But in the process of doing that, Cedric Diggory still loses the tournament and becomes bitter and becomes a Death Eater. He then kills Neville Longbottom. Voldemort wins the Battle of Hogwarts. Harry Potter dies, and you have a situation where Voldemort is then ruling the wizard world, and Dolores Umbridge is the headmistress, and Severus Snape is still alive, but he's the leader of the underground who is opposing Voldemort. And so time travel always gets confusing, but Scorpius has to do some time travel to fix all this mess, and he does so with the help of Severus Snape. Professor Snape, who is leading the underground, actually helps Scorpius straighten all this out, but they still have to go and prevent Voldemort from winning again. They have to go all the way back to Godric's Hollow and make sure that Voldemort kills Harry Potter's parents. And Draco Malfoy by this time is right in the middle of all this. You know, their sons have become best friends, and Draco is with Ron, Harry, and Hermione in Godric's Hollow as they've all gone back in time to meet Albus Severus and Scorpius, and they fix the situation so that Voldemort does exactly what he's supposed to do, and history moves forward, and eventually Harry and the good wizards do win the Battle of Hogwarts, and they did so with Draco Malfoy's help, and Draco is now thoroughly on the good side. He, by this time, has realized all of the evil that he's been involved in. He has gotten away from it. His son has become best friends with Albus Severus Potter, and he has to go on a mission with Harry and Ron and Hermione to save Albus Severus and Scorpius, and to make sure that history unfolds the way it did so that Voldemort ultimately loses. And so, after all of his bad behavior, after being the quintessential bully for all this time, we end up with Draco Malfoy, good guy, and actually becoming friends with Harry and Ron and Hermione. And that was the change that, as a first-time reader and as a first-time movie viewer, I was hoping to see that complete turnaround. Because when you have this really bad, awful person, in a way it's tempting to want to see them get what they have coming and to get what they deserve. But even Dumbledore didn't feel that way. He was urging Draco not to take the wrong path, and Draco did continue on the wrong path for quite a while. But ultimately, after the original defeat of Voldemort, he did realize the error of his ways, and as we see in The Cursed Child, Draco Malfoy became a good guy. I wouldn't say that that's very common in real life, but it can happen, and it does happen in real life. And so what we ultimately see with the story of Draco Malfoy, the quintessential bully, the typical bad guy, the kind of guy that you wouldn't want your kids to be involved with at school, the kind that you wouldn't want anything to do with, the kind who had these dumbbell lackeys who were helping him bully other people, he makes the turnaround and ultimately becomes a good guy. And that, to my mind, is a far more satisfying conclusion than seeing him get his. I would really have liked to see Dolores Umbridge get hers, because she never did turn into a good person. She was just thoroughly evil. But Draco was sort of a victim of his circumstances, carried along by circumstances beyond his control, forced into the bad life, and he ultimately becomes Draco Malfoy, good guy. And that's the story of Draco Malfoy, bad guy turned good guy.